Should we get started? Hey, thank you everybody for coming, and thank you in the audience for coming as well. I'm going to ask anybody in the audience right now if they know if they want to participate in the public comment period. Make a statement. You do, sir? Several? Okay. Thank you. Okay, well, welcome. So we just passed out some additional materials that we'll be getting into, but the first thing is, although the agenda is slightly revised, we still start and end at the same time. And but it's just the matter in which we're going to go ahead and present these options because there's a fair amount of detail. You guys just had a map and it didn't really tell you anything, but now a lot of the handouts today we're about to go over on those. So thank you for that. This is a sign-in sheet for the advisory committee. I'll just pass this over to this table. If you just put an X or sign your name if you're in here. You'll see your names are on there, so you can just check or sign your name next to it. That'd be great. So, this meeting is all about identifying options for the boundary study in terms of maps. I never know how to work this thing. Ha! I did it. So the purpose of tonight's meeting is to identify up to 3 options for the boundaries. And why are we doing this? Just kind of wanted to revisit that. There is overcrowding at Jeanette Rankin, Rattlesnake, and it's near capacity at Paxson and Lewis and Clark. And that's one reason, is we want to reduce the overcrowding. And the other is that several schools have existing enrollment of less than 350. So the other objective or goal is to bring those that are under capacity up in enrollment. And the objectives, these come from the guiding framework. You ideally want to allow room for growth. You want to minimize the need for future attendance area adjustments. Adhere to the state standards for class size and school size, which that's how the schools were designed in terms of 500 capacity. Impact the least number of students in the short term. So now I'm going to go over each school and talk about how important things related to that school that relate to this boundary study, things that we've learned since starting this, things that we've learned through comments, things that we've learned from the advisory committee, and things that we've learned from the forecast. So just in alphabetical order, Charlo is the most rapidly declining, has the most rapidly declining enrollment over the 10-year forecast period, but it does have some potential for new development in the Linda Vista area. Ryan, can you pull up that poster board and maybe put it someplace where people can see it? Oh, it's over there, I see, but.
It's a tough spot to say.
You know, this easel moves.
Is there a way to flip something on the top or leave it?
Oh.
Yeah, I know. I'm just going to have Ryan point to that area. Ryan, can you just hold up in the Charlo area? You can see that that kind of kidney-shaped piece right there is an area that's identified with high potential for future development. And so a part of the Charlo area falls into that as well. So even though it's forecast to have declining enrollment, if that kidney-shaped area that extends over into the Charlo district were to start expanding, things might change a little bit. The school has managed to sustain its enrollment numbers fairly high at 412 in the fall of 2018-19 because it's a net importer. So I've highlighted on this chart, I'll walk through this chart right now. So the first column is enrollment in 2018-19, and the two yellow highlighted schools, Franklin and Lowell, are the two with the lowest capacity, I mean the lowest current enrollment. They're way under 350. The next column is the number of students who live in the boundary. So I've highlighted in red where the number of existing students in 2018-19 exceeded the capacity of the school. Those include Jeanette Rankin, where it was 77 over, Lewis and Clark 15 over, and Rattlesnake was 3 over. Then the next column is capacity for in-boundary students. So are they a net importer of students or a net exporter? Well, Charlo's a net importer. They're importing, I mean, when I say importing, you know, these are transfers in. So they're bringing in about 100 students, primarily from Jeanette Rankin. Franklin is looks like I did that wrong. Franklin is a net exporter, but I highlighted it in green because it has capacity, clearly. Hawthorne is under capacity, and it's a net importer. And Lewis and Clark is near full capacity, but it's a net exporter. So I'll talk about that in a minute. So Lowell is basically at equilibrium. They're they're less than 1% of exports net, which is the next column. So that next column is the percent of net transfer. But I'm going to go back to the other column. Rattlesnake is it's relatively, I put it as over, even though the actual enrollment is under, because they have the combination of both having more students than capacity. I mean, you could say at 503, they could probably fit them in to a school meant for 500, but they're over the 500 limit. But they also are a net exporter. They're sending out more kids than are coming in from other areas. And then there's Russell, which is under and also a net importer. So the next column is, like I mentioned, it's the net transfer. That's the if transfers in are a positive number, transfers out are a negative number. And so all the schools have some transfers in and some transfers out, and that basically is in minus out. Special programs, this is a list because this has come up. It came up in public comments. Well, where are the special programs? And some people are drawn to special programs. Well, all the schools have a number of programs that aren't even listed on here, but they each have those programs. So I didn't list the ones that they all have. But this is a list of the programs that each school has. And I think it's interesting to point out that Franklin and Lewis and Clark have exactly the same kind of additional programs. The last two columns are the change in enrollment as forecast. So what I've done there is if there's going to be a decrease in the 5-year period, it's shown in red, and if there's an increase, it's just shown as a positive number, with the exception of Jeanette Rankin and Lowell. So I've kept those because they're the only schools that maintain a positive increase in enrollment over each 5-year period, and Lowell is the only one that basically keeps chugging along. You can see up there with Jeanette Rankin, it's forecast to increase by 15.3% in the first 5 years, and then although they're increasing, it's dropped off rapidly. So that's my summary of that table, but back to the school by school. So obviously Franklin, along with Lowell, has the smallest student population, and they basically need more students. The International Baccalaureate and structured learning programs could be used to attract more students, and that came up in comments not particularly directed towards Franklin, but just in general towards low enrollment schools. So, and this is also another area with high potential for infill residential development. So Franklin, I don't know Ryan, if you'd go up there and point where Franklin roughly is on the, in relation to those high potential areas. So they fall within this high potential area that's in the center of the city that is targeted by the city for more infill development. It's where the mall is being redeveloped. It's where the mill site. So there's other areas that have potential for redevelopment up there. So again, this is one that could grow perhaps beyond the forecast, depending on what happens in how that is realized. Hawthorne. Hawthorne isn't forecast to grow or decline by much. There's 36 transfers out to target range, which this is something that you all may not know about. So some people in that Hawthorne district are sending their kids to target range. One thing we know is that Target Range is not charging fees for those out-of-area students. If that policy were to change, people might change their mind, then those students might come back in. We've received comments from the advisory committee and from the general public that we should just leave Hawthorne the way that it is. That said, the area north of the area of Hawthorne that's north of Franklin is also part of that high potential for infill area. So Jeanette Rankin, this is the absolute fastest growing area. 142 new houses were permitted in the 5-year period between 2013 and 2017, and in 2017 there were 1,417 remaining entitled lots, and that information is from the latest urban fringe development area report that the city and the county put out. So 577 students live in the current boundary and about 100 go out. This area is expected to grow by another 100 students in 10 years, with the biggest growth obviously occurring in the next 5 years. Former Cold Spring students and families feel tossed about and do not want to change schools again. We also received many comments about the potential, is there a potential to reopen Cold Springs? Lewis and Clark, it's nearly full and it's a net exporter. So 515 students live in the boundary and 59 students attend elsewhere. 59 students who live in the boundary go out. It has the same program that Franklin does, the baccalaureate program and the structured learning programs. Parents in that area have been vocal about their ties to the school, and we have received comments about areas that should not be changed to another boundary. Lowell, like Franklin, they're like off by 1, 312 and 313 enrollment. They're the smallest. Lowell is the only school forecast to have sustained growth at the same rate for the first 5 years and the second 5 years, and that's what I already pointed out. That's why those numbers are highlighted in green in those last 2 columns for Lowell. So this area includes the Villaggio, which we talked about last time, which is this 200-unit affordable housing complex that's being completed now. And this area also has high potential for additional new development because of the fact that it's part of a tax increment finance district and because it's part of a federally designated opportunity zone. Both of those things have incentives to encourage a private development and investment in the area, particularly with the opportunity zone designed to reduce the level of poverty. Paxson is near full and a net importer. It has the Spanish immersion program. It's forecast to grow rapidly in the first 5 years, then decline by almost as fast as it grew. That northwest area of the school boundary next to, that's next to the river, that is also part of the area that's forecast for high potential for infill. And let's see, okay, so we have received comments about Paxson in particular too, about considering how the Spanish immersion program and students coming in from out of area to there can make a difference in this boundary adjustment. So the rattlesnake is over capacity, essentially. I mean, it's roughly at capacity, at 479 in the fall, but it's got the 503 students living there, and it's a net exporter. So this area includes the area that of students that used to go to Mount Jumbo. And we received a lot of comments about Mount Jumbo and could that open and what would it take to open. We also had various perspectives on what you could do to relieve that. So one was, don't change Rattlesnake. It has strong neighborhood integrity and culture. If you're going to change it, take the lower Rattlesnake. If you're going to change it, take East Missoula. So we heard a lot of conflicting things. So there were 32 students who transferred out of that school. So, and the last school on the list, Russell, it's under capacity and a net importer. This area is forecast to slowly have a decline in enrollment. The north part of the school area has high potential for infill because it's in that central area and it's close to the mall development. So that's kind of a quick overview. I want to go over just a few other comments. All the schools have good programs. That came up at this advisory program. I mean, this advisory committee sort of, everybody should be aware that these are good schools. What about creating special programs to increase enrollment at undercapacity schools? That was a comment from the open house. What about reducing transfers into Paxson just to attend Spanish immersion? How can we reduce transfers into Lewis and Clark? And how does this affect, well, some people don't ask the question, how does this affect my property values? We've heard several comments, this absolutely affects my property values. And so we've talked to realtors in the meanwhile, and it used to be that when houses were assessed, they were assessed within school districts. That was the area you did for comps. It's not that way anymore, and it hasn't been that way for several years. So it doesn't I mean, when they're looking for comps, and the value of anyone's home is based off of comparables that they can find in the nearest proximity to your home that are closest to your home. It has nothing to do with the school district in terms of the area that they look in. So that's the overview, and we just, before we started this process of boundaries, it just seemed a good time to just reassess and review these things that we've heard. And if anybody has anything to add, let me know. Otherwise, we'll go to the next part on the agenda. Okay, well, thank you. Oh, yes.
Are we like beholden to the options as is?
We haven't gotten there yet. Just I would just advise you guys not to jump too far ahead in all of the maps and stuff at this point. Just pay attention to this information, and then we'll be going over each one of those maps in detail. And after we go over the first map, then we'll have discussion, and that way too. So that's a great question. Let's see if I had anything else on here. Oh, okay. So there have been a lot of questions about grandfathering, and so you do have a handout that we just gave out, and oh no, it's coming. I think I have this.
Look a couple pages and you'll see an image like the living standards.
And so basically what this is, it's kind of reminding us what will happen in the aspect of grandfathering. So if you were, and there's also another handout which talks about students who are leveled, and then students who are going for a special program of some type. So if you're leveled out, that happens because your school is full or your grade is full. In grandfathering, the thought is, I think the thought most people have is, well, if my kid's happy where they're in school now, please don't let the boundary change make that be anything different. If that were the case, so students who were enrolled in kindergarten this fall wouldn't be out of the elementary school until 2025, which is coincidentally a year after the peak enrollment for the entire district. And The other thing we've heard is, well, what about siblings? I've got, 2, 3-year-olds, or, younger kids who we just anticipated would go to the same school as their older brother or sisters. So if you have a kindergartner who enters now, they would be through with 5th grade in 2025. If you have a 3-year-old in 2019, they're going to start kindergarten in 2021, and they won't be done until 2027, which is the 9th year of the forecast. And then if you have babies this year, say before July, and they start, before July, they will start school in 2025, and they won't be done but elementary school was in 5th grade until 2031. So just ponder that. I think that Paxton, or Hatton, or Mark could go over some kind of illustrations of how what they've run into or how this might work.
Sure, well, I think these illustrations represent essentially what we've heard and what you've all heard from families that live in our community right now. The concern is certainly students who are in school, but we also recognize we have kindergarten registration happening right now. And those students will be kindergartners in 2019, fall of 2019. So those are the kindergartners that are represented in this first image. To help you just understand, kindergartners who enter our schools in the fall will exit 5th grade in 2025. And I think Nick, in the last attendance boundary advisory committee meeting, mentioned, hey, I'm looking at these demographics and I'm looking at the peak of when we see our highest enrollment, and that would match these kindergartners that are entering now and the period within which they would stay in their schools. And then what we also hear from families is, but I have a 3-year-old who's in preschool and I have a baby, and I expect that both of them can stay in the school together. We want families to stay together. So this isn't so much a comment on whether or not they should be able to stay together, it's to help you grapple with what that timeline looks like. So, whoops. Okay, you're gonna have to put it back on view mode for me. Thank you. So, those kindergartners who are entering next year, if they have a preschool sibling and they have a baby sibling, then they're really, what we hear parents asking for is, I want a commitment to stay in that school with my entire family, and that really keeps them there until 2031. So we're just trying to help you visualize the impact of what that would mean and how that would connect to the demographics as you've seen them. Did you want to get into specific school scenarios, or ready to move on?
When we come back to the grandfathering discussion at the end, I think there are a number of questions that are rattling around in my mind, and we can talk about what the impact of those might be. But I think first, let's look at the rest of the agenda, and we'll circle back to that at the end.
Any questions about how that's represented? Does that make sense to everybody, what you're looking at? Great, thanks.
Well, that's the end of the slideshow. So we can shut her down. Can you do that, Ryan? Thank you. Yeah, we just haven't found that the whole showing the maps on the screen is a very workable option. So we have large maps, which have we distributed those?
We've not.
Okay, well, can we just start with the first map, which is the bike walk map?
And that's actually in your packets too. You're gonna get a big version, but when you're looking in your packets, the bike walk map looks like this. It's this very small page next to all three of your large pages.
I don't know enough packet for
Each table is gonna get a very large map, so instead of that you each get individual ones to keep with you for your own reference. And this bike walk map, Ann will continue to describe, that this was submitted by the Bike Walk PED office, which is housed within the city of Missoula.
Yeah, so Ryan, when you get through distributing these large maps, and I'm I'm just gonna ask you to stay on this map one at a time, otherwise it's gonna start to get too confusing, I think. So, Ben Weiss is the bike walk coordinator for the city of Missoula. And I asked him if he could take a stab, sort of without any, if you could design the best walkable neighborhoods right now, what would they be? And he came up with this map. But he also took it a little bit further, and he said, some people aren't, the way that it's set up right now, some kids just really aren't within bike walk distance. So then he considered, well, what really makes sense in terms of a shortened ride or a more efficient ride for people driving their kids to school, for example. And so we'll just start on the north end there, which is this part of Paxson that becomes blue because Ben says that will be a really good place to have kids walk across and go to Lowell. In his words, I extended Lowell's boundary south across the river using Russell Street, South 3rd Street, and Orange Street as new boundary lines. This part of the riverfront neighborhood is not only closer in distance to Lowell than Paxson, but it is safer to bike and walk along the trail system than across Stevens, Orange, and Higgins, as is currently required. So I called him up and said, yeah, but wow, the kids are crossing the river and there's kind of some funky motels and stuff over there, and and what he said was they are working on, I think the Broadway Island, that's being redone. It's in the works. He said they are working on redevelopment in that area, and they are anticipating that a lot of those hotels will probably the weekly rate motels will close, that area is going to be transformed, not like tomorrow, but it's on the way. And so that's kind of a future perspective. But he said it could happen, it could be a noticeable difference even within 5 years. So just sharing that with you. Just to the west of that area in the Hawthorne district, he's colored it in green, saying, well, that would be a good place actually for those students to go to Franklin. And here's what he wrote. I extended Franklin's boundary to the north using Russell Street, Wyoming Street, Curtis Street, private driveways, and Davis Street as new boundary lines. Due to the cul-de-sac development in this neighborhood, the homes in this area are all much shorter bike rides or walks to Franklin than they are to Hawthorne. In fact, many of the homes in this area do not have easy access to the Milwaukee Trail that currently provides the safe route to Hawthorne, and their route would involve substantial backtracking to get to Hawthorne as a result. So that's his comment on that. So, on the next one down, this area of Lewis and Clark that would go to, is it Russell? I can't tell from here, my eyesight, yeah, to Russell. I asked him about that. He said, well, it's on the right side of Brooks, but he said partly I did that to offset the loss that Paxson would have if all those kids in the north end went to Lowell. And then the other piece that's in the corner, the southwest corner, is a little piece of a triangle. That just kind of evens out the line and keeps kids from crossing, is that 39th? So there you go. Now, some significant changes for Jeanette Rankin. So and I'm going to just come up here and maybe borrow the So I really asked him about this. What he was saying is these people have to come, right now, if they're driving, they have to come all the way around and then down, get to Jeanette Rankin. But he thought, well, they could just go to Charlotte. And I said, well, wouldn't it even be faster for them to go to Russell? And he said, that's actually a really good idea because, if these people are working in town or have things they need to do in town. Town is where people are gonna go, right? Most of the time, unless their jobs or something else takes them somewhere else. So he said, yeah, that's a pretty good idea. Then we talked a little bit about the fact that he didn't realize that Russell is so under capacity. So he was giving all these students to Charlotte, and that wouldn't help the undercapacity issues. He said, well, yeah, they could they could also go to Russell in some of this area too. Down here, I asked him about this because this isn't an easy walk to Chief Charlotte. It looks like it should be, right? Because as the crow flies, but actually, these students they're probably getting driven to Jeanette Rankin already, or they're going, if they were going to go to Charlotte, they'd have to come all the way down here, up, and then around. So that's not exactly a walk, probably be more like a drive, but they're likely already being driven to Jeanette Rankin as it is. And he said, if I lived here and I worked in town, I wouldn't love taking my kid all 10 minutes out of my way back and forth to get back and go back up. So he was thinking about it in kind of those terms as well. And I think and this too, he thought that this would be better off as going to Chief Charlotte. Again, he also said, seriously, I just like the straight line. So it was a pleasant conversation, but there was some really good thought to how he was thinking, not only about bike walk, but also just how people transport their kids to and from school, or maybe to daycares that might be somewhere else, or whatever, if those kinds of things are located here in the center of town. So I'm going to. So this is a great time for questions.
I guess I'm just confused by the orange, pink, and the yellow. The orange is for Russell? Is that correct?
No, Ben was clearly thinking all those kids would go to Charlotte. So if it looks like yellow, it's just because his marker just turned yellowish green over the green of Charlotte's boundary.
Okay, and so this pink spot then is Jeanette Rankin?
That's right.
This Cold Spring, okay.
He was using one of the old maps that we've been, this big school map, so it still says Cold Springs.
Okay, so all of the orange and the yellow then is Chief Charlotte?
Yes,
And then why does this say Russell right here?
because that was Russell's boundary. And he's changing it and turning Russell going into Charlotte too. So that's a good question. So any other questions on this one?
So just a clarification. So I think what Rachel was pointing out is the Bitterroot River flows between the pink and the orange. So you'd have the Blue Mountain Trailer Court and those areas that now come around and come over to Jeanette Rankin, I think is what he's moving. That chunk of territory, I think, is significantly larger than what the actual attendance area is out there. I think he's extended partially into the Lolo School District. So I think that's what makes that proportionally so confusing.
Still, it does extend on that area, and even on our map, we did look at the numbers of students who are out there now on that west side of the river, and that's probably about between 16 and 18 students. Just a number we haven't talked about, and you won't see it on your charts. So any other questions about this, or observations?
Did you just say on the edge as far as 16 to 18 students?
Yes. Yes. Oh, use your.
I might have misheard you, but the blue that is overlapping the word Russell,
Yes.
I thought I had heard you say that would compensate for the students that were lost from Paxson to Lowell?
So that doesn't make any sense, does it?
No. But I'm sorry, I might have just misunderstood.
I'm sorry, because I am, you know what? I'm rethinking that. He submitted 2 maps to us, and I'm thinking that explanation is incorrect, so thank you for answering that question. No, he really thought that that would be an easier walk for kids from that area to go to Russell instead of to go to Jeanette Rankin. He thought that made more sense from a bike walk perspective. He'd given us another map where he had even more options, but when we talked to him, we agreed that just this one map to show you.
Okay, so that blue blob, could you just tell us where those? Okay, so they're going to Russell instead of Lewis and Clark. Okay, thank you.
Any other observations or comments or questions on that one?
Okay, sorry, one more question. The smaller blue blob? Yes. Where would that one be? What did that indicate? What, okay,
So just to confirm, that's a small part of what is currently in Jeanette Rankin that would go to Russell. And his thought was, it's above 39th, it clearly makes more sense to have the kids go to Russell from a bike walk perspective. Yes?
Down Hatton, right there. That currently is for sale with the expectation that it'll be sold for houses. And it's just right across the gully from Chief Charlo. So it would make sense for me that that particular section up on the hill should go to Chief Charlo and not go down to Russell. Because if you build in that area, you'll be looking at Chief Charlo from there.
And that's how I think he,
So that's,
So he's drawing it in with
In
yellow.
Chief
or
Char-
outlining
Chief
it
Charlo.
to Chief Charlo.
oh, I
It's
see.
it's
Okay.
Brian, could you do me a favor and either use the flip chart paper or that whiteboard and write that comment down as an observation that, I mean, I haven't heard anybody else say it really should go to X or Y, and I hear you saying that it really should go to Charlo.
Right, and that's the same suggestion Ben is making with his mark.
Yes.
And just to continue to affirm, this is a transportation-based perspective. So, go ahead.
And I was just gonna ask, what, are Ben's recommendations, were they taken into consideration when the options were created, or is that something for us now to consider?
This, we did take some of this into consideration when we developed it, but we toyed with the idea of having an option that brought kids from Paxton over to Lowell, but we didn't know if it would be, well, frankly, I didn't realize about all the redevelopment in the future that's going to occur, so that was new information. And I also didn't realize that his perspective about the travel west of the river and where people go and how they have to come so far just to get to Jeanette Rankin, that was new. So some of this was considered, but some of it's new. And that's why we're showing it to you first, just so you kind of have it in your rolling in your head as you're looking at these other options. Anything else? Yes.
I understand the map's pretty much focused on biking and walking. We still have, there's a funky little area in the Paxton, Lewis and Clark, where Paxton's boundaries have kiddos that are 4 blocks away from Paxton and are having to be transported over to Lewis and Clark, and it doesn't look as though he looked at that, or at some of the university housing opposite South.
Good point. And on the phone conversation, he's let me make sure I'm talking about the same area.
Are we talking about this area? You're talking about there and then south out here. So this is south, that's south, so if you go, to the, so those kiddos, this area and this area, so there's 2 off the you're right, there's still, without the focus of the map, I'm not sure.
He did say there's a little bump of Lewis and Clark that kind of pushes up into Paxton. He goes, that would be a good area to just draw the line straight across. So he did say that afterwards, so he caught himself. I have to say, Ben spent, he worked this up, and I think the community should appreciate that. He spent the time doing this and giving us his perspective. But even he realized, he goes, wow, there's a lot of moving parts on this. So, yeah. So thank you for bringing up, these are great observations because they're bringing up things that in fact were discussed. So, okay. Well, I guess we'll go to the next one. Option 1, map option 1. So these maps are a little bit different than the ones in your packet because what we did is we numbered what we call the change areas. And this particular map, I think, has, what, six change areas? I can't remember. But we've numbered those, and then they correspond to... So you have 2 handouts that look like very detailed charts. Wherever you see a column with numbers that go to 11, those correspond to the numbers on these maps. And so it will answer the question, how many students will this affect? And I'm going to let Ryan walk through this with the microphone, and you can talk about each change area in terms of the numbers. Oh. There you go.
So as Ann mentioned, there are 6 areas that we are calling the change areas, which are areas that are kind of intersection boundaries between an existing boundary and where a boundary would push into. And so starting from number 1, and I guess to preface this, this option of boundary changes is based on the advisory committee meeting that we had a couple weeks ago. This is a lot of your feedback of areas that you've identified as good potential areas for adjusting boundaries. And so to bolster Lowell's enrollment, we talked about options of East Missoula and Lower Rattlesnake. And I think a lot of people thought that East Missoula going over to Lowell would not be adjusting its socioeconomic situation much, and they think that maybe it'd be a better option to take kids from the Lower Rattlesnake. And also with East Missoula, this is an area that if you were to grab all of those kids that currently are in East Missoula, and that area is expected to grow as well, you're going to be taking a lot of enrollment from the Rattlesnake. And so based on the 2018 data, you were going to see an increase of 52 kids coming from the Rattlesnake into Lowell. The next area that we've looked at as a change area, and you guys spoke about, is adjusting Franklin's boundary somewhere kind of north of Mount over to Orange, and then up to the river in this area here, and just kind of looking at how the distribution is with kids currently. That would dramatically decrease the enrollment of Paxton to grab that large of an area. And so with that, this area is just following the trail to the river. So it's kind of a good boundary as it stands now, and that would transition 54 kids to Franklin from Paxton. And to compensate for the loss of kids from Paxton, this is the area that we were just talking about, where kids live real close to Paxton, or but they attend Lewis and Clark. And we talked about going all the way to south to transition that boundary. And that would take a lot of kids away from Lewis and Clark. So to split the difference, this boundary is following Kent. So there still could be some movement there about where that boundary could go down to further to the south to give more enrollment to Paxton. The next area that we talked about was Bancroft, and where you might have some more kids transition from the west or the west side of Bancroft to Russell, as opposed to Lewis and Clark, because they're kind of right in the boundary where it's kind of either or. And so if you go ahead and make that transition to increase it all the way to Russell, you're gonna grab 35 more kids as it stands now. And then lastly, Jeanette Rankin and how that would be adjusted to compensate these other schools that have lower enrollment and decreasing enrollment with the increasing enrollment of Jeanette Rankin. And so the area that you see on the map is kind of following using Miller Creek as a boundary, which we discussed before, and using Briggs as the northern extent for Chief Charlo, and then everybody north of Briggs would go to Russell. And by doing so, you're going to take 100 kids from Jeanette Rankin and put them in Charlo's boundary, which there are already a lot of kids in that area that attend Charlo. And then you would also increase Russell by 70 kids. And so overall, it's a fairly good option looking at balance based on your feedback. So I guess this would be a good time to go around and see what kind of questions and concerns you guys have.
I'm just going to add a couple things on this. If he didn't already mention, there's several numbers on those tables. Do you talk about that? So each of the small little black dots has a number next to it, and numbering that is a number slash a number slash a number. Those three numbers are for that particular area, the 2018 enrollment, and then the 2023 enrollment forecast, and the 2028 enrollment forecast for that particular area. All the small black numbers all add up to the total area. There are also larger numbers in red, and those are the numbers that are of the boundary that that's the enrollment that it would be for the school if this map change were to occur. So that's what that means. And I also just wanted to talk about a couple things. This is as good a time as any. So, and excuse me, Ryan, one of the things I was trying to do was load up on the internet to get into our project files so we could load up these Excel spreadsheets so we could see them on the screen. This area, I mean, you know, should it be Lower Rattlesnake? Should it be East Missoula? I mean, people were divided on that. Kind of most people that we heard from Rattlesnake is don't do anything or use East Missoula because we don't want to see this is a neighborhood. But so then we talked a little bit about, and we also had questions from the public at I think every open house. Well, what about Mount Jumbo? You know, is that a possibility to reopen that? And the answer is that it's possible. It's more within the range of achievable than any other closed school, because it wouldn't cost as much. I don't know how much detail we want to give, but essentially, if the numbers were, so we already know that Rattlesnake over the 10-year forecast is projected to decline and to be within a reasonable number that will be able to handle all the students who live within the boundary. So, but we put this up here to sort of highlight the what if. So it may not be an option you choose, but just know that it's been discussed. And it's also been discussed, well, what would it take to reopen Mount Jumbo? Well, of all the areas up there that are forecast for high potential for development, this is East Missoula, and some people think it's going to continue to grow and other people think not so much. And so it's kind of a little bit of a wild card. But if that were start to develop into a critical mass, the school district is open to considering what it would take to reopen Mount Jumbo. So it's kind of out there in the 5-year perspective. Mark, I don't know if you want to add anything?
I think you summed it up well. If East Missoula does continue to grow, we have currently 156 K-5 students that live out in East Missoula. I don't know if we could land on a critical number that would allow us to absorb the overhead to reopen Mount Jumbo, but it's a good facility, would require a moderate amount of some upgrades, some safety and security features, those kinds of things. But that would have the combined effect of serving the East Missoula community and also relieving pressure on Rattlesnake. I would suggest that if you considered the option you have before you, and if you moved students, say, from the lower Rattlesnake to Lowell, then that would, in all likelihood, remove that option of opening Mount Jumbo from the table, because there'd be no compelling reason to consider it. Rattlesnake would have plenty of capacity to continue to serve the portion of Rattlesnake that remains, as well as East Missoula.
What's the capacity of Mount Jumbo?
Right now, there are 16 regular ed classrooms at Mount Jumbo, so it's certainly less than the 500 student capacity that we have at our other buildings, but I wouldn't expect that kind of dramatic growth in East Missoula to get from 156 students to 500 students, for example, in the near term. But we do have an extensive amount of property out there, too. Pardon me? Sure, yep, yeah. We did double up. We had some super-sized classrooms, like some super Ks with 2 teachers and basically 40 kids in a classroom. But we did make some modifications to make that happen.
Can you use a microphone? Sorry, can you pass a microphone?
I just wanted to make a comment about the rattlesnake option. One thing that was brought up in this advisory committee meeting the last time was that although, we didn't have a whole lot of time to go over the projections, but it was like, oh, that looks like a great option. But I think when people really delved a little bit deeper at the open house and talking to a lot of people, it seemed like the lower Rattlesnake, getting to Rattlesnake School is actually quite easy. There's a safe route the entire way that kids often bike, and it's very difficult to get to Lowell. There's many physical obstacles on the way. I think also parents are concerned that since there is a lot of support to open up Mount Jumbo in the future, that people don't want 2 adjustments. And I know if this option does happen, then Mount Jumbo's off the table, but there is, I want to just mention, a lot of support within East Missoula to eventually open up Mount Jumbo. So I just wanted to add that I know at our advisory committee we did talk about this option, but there were also other options that we discussed as well.
Well, I wanted to add to that too, because I feel like when we were drawing those lines, we weren't necessarily, we didn't really have a chance to look at all of the numbers, and you're right, at the open house, like, when you see those numbers, yeah, it seems like it could work out fine the way that it is, and then, yeah, leaving the Mount Jumbo option eventually.
Anybody else? Yes?
Do these numbers at all take into account grandfathering?
I'll just repeat the question. She asked if these numbers take into account grandfathering. No, they don't. And we are going, that's why we had this little short talk, what is, the various components of grandfathering or potential components to kind of separate the two. Because first we're dealing with the boundaries, but this is obviously an important question, so it's how does this deal with grandfathering? So right now, these maps just deal with moving boundaries and moving kids within the boundaries. The concept, we want to have the discussion of grandfathering. You can do that as you're looking at these, but I think it almost makes some sense to hold that whole conversation until you've looked at all 3 maps and then kind of take it from there. Other questions?
Just a question on the map. For 4 of these schools, the red numbers are the same as the black numbers?
Yeah, that means the boundary didn't change.
Well, it did for Rattlesnake.
then the rattlesnake number should change, right?
Right.
And it isn't?
No, it doesn't change there, or Lewis and Clark, or
Um,
Jeanette Rankin, or Hawthorne.
I can give a little more clarification on that. So what that red number in black is indicating is that is the population of students within the area that is shaded for the color for that school attendance boundary minus what the new addition is. So that's effectively saying what is all of the green that's now not being factored into its original boundary, which is in that dashed red area. So even if there's a school area that contracts, that population also decreased, and that's just showing what that actual number is for each of these intersection boundary areas. So they all work independent, but using the area that's in red will be the total for each of the schools. So there are 4 schools, as you said, that don't have any changes shown from the black number to the red number, but that's just how that's being shown on the map.
I also had a question about that when I first saw that. Well, how does this work? So the way to really think about it is that green number, that number that's in black down there for rattlesnake on the lower center, that's the number for just that what's in green, right? Because that, and then it just so happens that that's also the proposed boundary of the new school, so that's why those numbers are the same.
Because there is no additions to that. You'll see with a school like Charlo, there are 2 areas that it's pulling from.
Is Lowell off? Is that what you're saying?
No, I was saying, so
Okay.
then this number is this particle, that number is that blue.
Correct.
So those go together.
Yes. And yes. Okay, yeah, it's not exactly intuitive, but again, the way to think about this is those black numbers are for each kind of separate area. So there's 11 change areas, and then there's the rest, each of the areas that aren't a change area. When you add up all those black numbers, it equals the total area and total enrollment. Okay. Any other questions?
To go back to grandfathering, just to clarify, were you thinking we were going to talk about it still today at this meeting separately? Okay, thank you.
Absolutely. Okay. Okay, we're going to move on to the next map then. This is the map this is option 2. Although we haven't given these names, I call this the least change map because the only boundaries that change are, take it away, Ryan.
So as Ann said, there's only a few areas that actually have boundary changes, and this is due to kind of the agreements that a lot of, the advisory committee shared with McKibben's forecast numbers and saw that, maybe you don't need to do anything with the rattlesnake, that we're it's at a peak now and it's going to decrease over time. And with that, this is just kind of massaging the area of Jeanette Rankin just so that it can, lose a number of students so that it can go under capacity. Meanwhile, transitioning kids to mostly Charlo and Russell. And you'll see that Charlo and Russell's boundaries are a little bit different than what was on option 1. This is kind of looking at a little more fine tuning about where there are parcel information, some driveways, also where parents would drive out from where they're located out to work. And so you'll see that divider has changed for Charlo and for and Russell. And then this area is also incorporating kind of around the Hillview area for Russell, kind of areas that a lot of houses, a lot of parents are able to just have kids and drive right to Hillview and go right to Russell, and that's a little bit easier of a route than how they're currently being taken into Lewis and Clark. And just to also reiterate with these options is that by no means is this option set in stone that nothing else can change. You know, there could be additions and subtractions based on what you've seen from other options and what you take away from today. So this is just another version to get your heads around.
Yeah, I don't have a whole lot more to say about that one, other than that, under this option, you know, Franklin and Russell are just gonna continue to be the lowest attended schools, so, you know, and you're gonna have issues still with Paxson and Lewis and Clark being at near capacity, because unlike Rattlesnake, they're not projected to decrease quite as much. I think that, again, raises the question of, well, should something, you know, do you think about how we accept students for our immersion program, or, you know, again, that's kind of gets into your question related to grandfathering, or how you accept students to programs. So I guess we can just go to the, wait, before I do that, questions on this one? Yes?
I just have one question about Lowell. I noticed that there's only one change for Lowell, and that's option 1. Just as far as their numbers, so option 2 and then 3, there's no change for Lowell?
That's right.
Okay. And I guess I was just wondering how people feel about that, like just having one option for boosting those numbers, when there possibly could be another option to put in, another alternative to put into one of these options to maybe decrease that number at Paxson, for instance, and boost some numbers at Lowell. Just an idea. Just maybe taking Ben's, you know, map into consideration.
So after we get through presenting all the options, we have like a worksheet for everybody, every single individual to work on, and the tables can talk about this, and you guys can mix and, you know, come up with your own ideas as well. But go ahead, Hatton.
So I'm just going to add back in one of the things that was considered in between your last meeting and now with regard to Lowell, and what would happen with the need to boost enrollment, was still thinking about the Villaggio development and the other opportunity zone development that's likely to happen. So thinking that there is a high potential for development in that area that would, on its own course, increase enrollment there without adjusting boundaries with other schools. That was some of the thinking.
Thank you, Hatton. I was thinking about that too, so that's another reason why, frankly, you won't see Lowell. I mean, they kind of are just, remember, they're the only school that was projected to have steady increases in both 5-year segments, the first 5-year and the 10-year. So that seemed like a pretty healthy kind of a thing, and that's even without McKibben's forecast taking into account what might happen with the opportunity zone. So I guess anything else on this one? Okay, so the third option I'm going to tell you in part why we developed the third option the way that we did. So when you look at, the big change on this one is down in Jeanette Rankin, and it's way kind of on the southern part of Lower Miller Creek. It's to the west. And what stimulated this was looking at the enrollment forecasts in the other two scenarios and going, well, gee, we're still right around 500, you know? And so what else can you do? And then also, what if development continued to occur, you know, or at least as fast or faster than it has in the past? Now, that could happen, I mean, but this also just takes into account that this is an area, and I don't have the cadastral to show you, but this is an area where most of the lots have recently gone to final plat. Some have sold. Where that one dot is down in that corner for number 11, 2 students came from that area in 2018-19, so there wasn't a ton of development occurring, even just this last fall. But they are breaking ground. You can see it in the Google Earth or the aerial on the cadastral. They are breaking earth even on phases that haven't received final plat approval. So that is the area that is most likely to see new development in the next 5 years. And frankly, those kids are outside of the 1 mile bike walk area as the crow flies, so then they're gonna have an even longer bike walk to work. So those are also the kids who would go be on the bus or probably get a ride from their parents. So 11. Do I mean 10? Oh. I'm sorry. That would be 10. Yeah. So the thing about that is that if you were worried about impacting existing students, that's an area where there aren't a lot of existing students. And it's not offered in this particular scenario as an alternative to what's happening up in the north end. It's offered because that probably won't be enough, given the projections to cover. So comments, there's some talking going on at this table, maybe they want to share. Do you guys want to share? Well, if you're talking about this,
Right. I will say that, well, we weren't talking about Jeanette Rankin. I was just looking at the Hawthorne change.
Hey, I'm just going to ask that everybody listen, or you're going to lose out on some. We'll go to each table at this point if you have something you already want to talk about, but let's listen to what everybody has to say.
I was looking at the number 11 Hawthorne change. What happens is Hawthorne's population decreases significantly, and some of the data that you've provided for us earlier, one was the number of students with IEPs. That number will not change when you change the people in number 11 to Franklin, because of the only special program that Hawthorne you had listed, which is the special education center-based extended resource program. Those kids will stay. They come from out of area. Franklin does not have that program, so the kids would stay, and it would upset the balance of students within the school.
You're saying like the density of students with IEP would increase.
Even more, and we already had the most students in the elementary district with IEPs at Hawthorne.
IEP, can you explain to me what that is again?
Individual education plan. So they have special needs that require a lot of extra programming and support.
And the program is in Hawthorne.
Yes. And if you remember the list, Lowell has it too, and so does Russell. But on the data that was provided last time, we at Hawthorne had the highest number of students with IEPs in the district. And we love them. But it would change the balance of the I don't know how to say it politically, the density.
So this was an option that actually came out of discussion from thinking about the program that Franklin did have. And Hatton, I don't know if you want to kind of explain a little bit your thoughts on that?
But my question is, why would you make Hawthorne smaller?
The question isn't how to make Hawthorne smaller, because it doesn't, well, it does, but the thought was just how could you expand? It does two things. What if Target Range starts charging? And
That's 40 kids, and not all of them are even, that's 40 students, or 32 students, whatever it is. That's not, we wouldn't be at capacity even if they all came.
oh no, you wouldn't be at total capacity of 500, yeah.
We wouldn't, we have 413 now.
So it's totally reasonable to be questioning this, and that's the purpose of this discussion, but the thinking behind this idea, and granted, this would be a 69 student area, the thinking behind it was if students from Target Range, granted they're only 40, did come back to Hawthorne, where would we make some buffer for that? The other thinking came from the bike walk ped map around easy transportation routes to get to Franklin from this area.
And then the third layer of thinking, and this is just a unique aside, it doesn't have to drive the whole decision, is Franklin is an international baccalaureate program. We know that we have a lot of students who are coming to Missoula through refugee resettlement who happen to be living in this northern area, and might that be an interesting programmatic decision for them. But again, that doesn't have to drive that. I'm just giving you some of the insights that created this idea.
In part, and it's also a response to some of those comments about, can we draw more on the special programs that we have to attract students to other schools? But this is a boundary change too, so anyway, that's where it came from.
So my question is about access to Jeanette Rankin. Is there going to be some changes to that road as well? I mean, there's really only the one way from Miller Creek in, and it's already congested. So wasn't there a city plan about changing access to Jeanette Rankin? And that would, I would think, when you were saying it's easier for people to drop their kids off at Russell on the way to work as opposed to swinging back in this way, I would think that changing the roads in this area would make a difference to access to.
Are you referring to Lower Miller Creek Road?
Yeah.
So if you're a nerd like I am, in Sunday's Legals in the Missoulian, the city's actually doing a request for proposal for an engineering study for Lower Miller Creek Road from the intersection of Linda Vista Boulevard and Miller Creek, which is where the sidewalks end, through the S-curves on past Bitterroot Road. The initial engineering study is to look at not only the roadway, but curb, sidewalks, gutters. And my belief is that they'll try and get the plans developed, possibly phase the project with the sidewalks being a high priority.
Any talk of bus routes?
Pardon me?
Any talk of bus routes in that area?
Not at this point.
Okay, other thoughts, comments, questions on this option map? If not, what I'd like to do now is hand out to each table these worksheets. Here, Ryan, I'll actually. So these are worksheets that look at the individual change areas, but obviously you've had some other options presented to you, particularly off of the bike walk map. And what this is a worksheet that compares to essentially the evaluation criteria. Does this reduce overcrowding? Does it address economic or other types of diversity? And you'll see in your packet, we included some information on that. So here's the deal on accessing information on race and income and those kinds of things. It's highly proprietary. And so you can get it down to the tract level from the census for income. And so that's what I did a map for you guys that shows poverty level to the tract level, but they don't exactly correspond. That's a map with the green area boundaries. It's kind of in green. And then the other way that we did it was to say in each change area, you can take publicly available information from the Department of Revenue based on the state's appraisal system and identify the value of single-family homes. And that's all that it is. And obviously, single-family homes is only is a component of all the types of housing, but it was a reasonable indicator for you guys to see those. There's something in there that shows the value of homes in the change area and then the effect that that would have on the average priced home in the area it's moving to. So it'll either go up or down. It can be dramatic in some cases. So that's a resource for you to look at. The bike walk, you already have in your binders those bike walk maps with the quarter circumference for walking and mile for walking. So essentially, we're saying go through this perhaps individually for a minute, about, 5 or 10 minutes, just kind of jot some notes down for yourself, and then start sharing your ideas as a group, and then we'll come back together again. And then that's when we'll talk about you can talk about grandfathering at your table too, because we'll need to bring that up. Yeah, may I borrow this? So on this chart that she's talking about, down here, down at this graph at the bottom, that's the median home price, median, MEDIAN, in the current boundaries. So it's the whole boundary, that's what it is. Up above, you have the median value of a house in just the change area. And so that's what those numbers are. So what the last column over here, and some are highlighted green because they show a big influx of additional income, essentially, students that come from higher income valued houses, not homes, houses. And essentially that number is derived by taking, say in the case of Rattlesnake to Lowell, the median was 285,100. If you subtract out the value from Lowell, which is 201,300. The difference is 83,800. So that's the net kind of change. It's just kind of a measure. This is a gross measure. If it says green, you're bringing in kids who generally are higher income. If it's going down, and you can see there's really not a lot of difference in most of these. Most of the changes, the biggest changes are higher income coming into an area, with the possible exception of Lewis and Clark to Paxson. But otherwise, a $10,000 difference, it's potentially kind of, on the borderline. That answer your question? Oh, too many numbers. But we couldn't think of a better way to talk about socioeconomic diversity.
But shouldn't percent of rental homes be considered in that?
It could be, but we were just trying, you can't assume that everybody who lives in a rental is, on poverty. That's why I gave you the poverty statistics. We don't know the income of people who are living in rentals. I mean, you might assume, but we just didn't go there. Some of the rentals here can be quite high. Okay, well, we'll just let you get to it, and then if you have questions, if you got questions for us, just raise your hand and we'll come over. We're going to get started. Does any table want to just raise their hand and be number one? And so when you make these, presentations, we're just going to remember that, this is a district-wide thing, and I haven't noticed an issue with this group before, but when we make these, we really have to think about not only an individual interest or concern, but also the entire district and how it's going to work best for the district. So anyway, with that said, does anybody want to start out? Mandy almost looked like she was raising her hand just because she was moving that piece of paper. Okay, well, we'll just go. I think last time we did this way. Now we'll start with this table. And you need a... So I would suggest, as you guys make your presentation, that we look at the maps up here. So we'll pull them up if there's one particular map, and you guys can kind of take it from there.
Thanks. Okay. So on change area number 1, do you want us to just start that way? When it talks about addressing over and under capacity, we put that it addresses the overcapacity for Rattlesnake. We did not think that it supported the bike walk. Does it improve diversity? Yes. And in terms of balancing the neighborhood, we put no for the Rattlesnake, but yes for Lowell. Okay, change area number 2. Addresses over under capacity, we put for Franklin, yes, for Paxson, no?
It's a wash.
It's a wash, okay. For supporting bike and walking, we put Franklin crossing over Russell, no, would not be a good option. Improves diversity, no, it hinders Paxson. Balances neighborhood culture, no. Number 3, option number 3, change area, we put no real change.
No real change would make a difference with it moving forward? I mean, move from Lewis and Clark to...
We thought the neighborhoods were pretty comparable. Change area number 4, addressing over under capacity, we put yes for Russell. Supports biking and walking, yes. Diversity, not much of a change. Balances neighborhood culture, not much of a change. And then we just started 5, change area 5, and we put for over and under capacity, yes. And supporting bike and walking, yes.
I will say, we wound up having a lot of conversation about just those last 2 questions. Like, what does that really mean about improving diversity when we're talking about the shifts and the receiving and the sending? Like, what does that mean? And then also that notion of what are we really talking about when we say balancing and culture? Like, a neighborhood culture at Rattlesnake, what does that mean for Rattlesnake versus then sending to Lowell? And that our conversation wound up going deep there.
So this group asked that question to me late and so maybe other people had that too, but that is a reflection of comments that we received that some neighborhoods have a very distinct culture, and it reflects the comments that were made at the very first advisory committee also about, so you can talk about increasing diversity, but if that means breaking up kids who are minority populations or, by sending them to some other school or something, then no one really wanted to do that. So you wouldn't want to see a piece of the neighborhood go. And I think that was actually one of your points too.
Well, my question is, what is the definition of diversity in this conversation? Is it economic? Is it cultural?
All of the above.
Right, but it's going to make a big difference as far as when we're talking about incoming refugee population. That's cultural diversity, but Missoula, I have to say, is not culturally diverse compared to a lot of places.
So
what are we talking about when we're talking about diversity?
Well, certainly cultural diversity came up too. It's just that was harder to measure, so. But it's on the list of things to look at in your criteria. So I just want to ask this table, did anything strike you as working of all the 3 options? Did you, even as individuals, can you respond to the concept, did something strike you as, well, that's really not going to work, or this might be the best option?
I think one of the things that struck me was, out of all the options, is that what we really wanted to look at were the safety issues. Having kids having to cross certain streets, and a lot of that was what really struck me, is that we want to make sure the kids are safe going to school and coming home from school.
I would add that under option 11, or number 11, not option 11, we agreed with Becky that we think merging that population would not be a great idea.
Yeah.
Number
11. I just wanted to second what Willina said, that I kept finding myself cross-referencing the map that Ben gave us for the transportation, and trying to merge that with some of the best options of each of them, and just taking that into consideration.
Okay then. So, I guess moving on to this table.
I will say, we did not have time to go through all of them, and so I think that we kind of struggled. We spent a lot of time sort of upfront not realizing the limited time that we had, so it makes it a little bit difficult when we're going through each of these options and asked to weigh in on our opinions when we really didn't get to have a complete discussion. And it sounds as though the table behind us maybe didn't have time as well.
I think there was concern in our group that, like, as we are looking at all three of the options, that there were adjustments or changes that we would make in all of the options, or other options that we wish we could see. Like, for example, Rattlesnake only had one option where a change was proposed, yet, like, they're still relatively high in numbers compared to other schools. And then, like, the reality of, like, how realistic is it that Mount Jumbo would be an option down the road when you think about the expense of opening up a brand-new school. So I kind of felt like we were, like, appeased for a minute, thinking, okay, well, if we don't go with option one, there's always Mount Jumbo on the table. But then the reality is, if we don't go with option one, then there's no change for Rattlesnake, and that school stays really close to overcapacity. And that was concerning, and we didn't look at changes. Like, we thought about, like, what about a change where East Missoula kids go to Paxson and what that might look like, and how you could make other adjustments. And so little things like that we would have liked more time to discuss or explore before presenting these kind of options to the community. And then we also talked about in the Lewis and Clark and Russell neighborhood, option 4, we had a big discussion about the impact that would have on Lewis and Clark's neighborhood in terms of this small neighborhood to the south of Playfair Park, and how that would impact those families and students who currently attend Russell, or currently attend Lewis and Clark. If they were to move to Russell, it wouldn't have a huge impact on numbers on Russell, but it would have a pretty significant, we believed it would have a pretty significant impact on those families, feeling like they were part of that Lewis and Clark neighborhood, because they're still within easy walking distance to Lewis and Clark.
And a lot of those.
For just a minute, because obviously we heard that table number 1 didn't get through all the options. I'm hearing similar comments from you. I suspect the same is going to be true here. And essentially, we've got a 3-hour meeting that we're trying to cram into 2 hours. And I think in order to do justice to consideration by the group of all 11 of those elements, maybe you need some more table time. And in saying that, I don't want to shortchange the grandfathering conversation, but in my mind, I'm thinking a couple things. Number one, we need to have some good options for community members to reflect on when we meet next Thursday in the open house. And your feedback's critical to developing those options. And then I'm wondering if we could not put out just background information and some prompts with regard to grandfathering, and then make that a significant portion of the next advisory committee meeting, because ultimately, when we get to a recommendation to go before the board, we're gonna need recommendation on boundaries, and we're gonna need to make a recommendation on grandfathering. And when I say that, I acknowledge that next Thursday, when community comes and looks at options, grandfathering is going to be on a lot of people's minds. So there's an important balance to strike there, and I think it's important to let the community know we're still having that conversation, and we need feedback on that particular point. But I think, we've got 10 minutes. If you could take some time maybe to look at the remainder of those options, get some things on paper so that they have your feedback to help draft proposals for Thursday, I think that's probably of the greatest value. Is there some relative agreement about that?
Yes.
Does that make sense, Ann?
No, I agree. Are you suggesting that this meeting go later tonight,
No,
or?
I'm suggesting that instead of reporting out for the next 10 minutes, the groups finish their conversations about those 11 options.
Yeah, and I think the place to go with, and of course we have, what that means, if we have a public comment period scheduled for 7:50, and so what that means is that we have to either stop, listen to public comment, or ask the public if they're willing to wait another, 10 minutes?
I bet people are time bound. I'd say, why don't we do 5 minutes of finishing table talk, just so you can wrap up what conversation you had, and then maybe we go to public comment and see if we can be efficient.
So I think the question really for each table is, what what would you change or add to any option? Forget the options. Is there something, and certainly from this table, I heard, from this table over here, I heard, could you please work in some of Ben Weiss's options that aren't already on the maps? I did hear that. And so that's something that we can play around with and see what we can come up with. And I think the thought is that if we did that, the maps that would be presented next week would be something that you could say reviewed or discussed by the advisory committee, but we would shy away from saying these are recommended options. You help develop them. Does that seem fair? So at this table, I hear you saying, well, we should add another option for East Missoula, potentially, a rattlesnake, for the rattlesnake, but I know the other one that was on the table was East Missoula. Is that what I'm hearing?
That was an idea.
So,
But East Missoula, we discussed not sending East Missoula to Lowell, but instead considering them as part of Paxton boundaries and how that might impact. But then Paxton boundaries would probably have to adjust to accommodate that influx too.
so you're suggesting East Missoula go to Paxson?
Yes.
Okay. So, and then the other change that you suggested was basically not including option 4, which is already not included on one of the options.
And not we had just discussed that as like an idea, not as.
But that is an area that we're already aware that people are concerned about, and that's why it's off on some of the other options, map options. So the question would be, anything you would change or add to options or considerations on these maps?
Generally, we appreciated that option 1 is the most aggressive boundary changes. It also turns out to do the best job at getting all of the schools to about that 80% or 85% goal. As a follow-up on that, and a kind of a connection to the grandfathering piece, if you do the more aggressive boundary change, it allows more flexibility to do some sort of grandfathering program, potentially. That was one thought we had. In terms of actual on-the-ground changes, one thing we did talk about, which was an idea that was proposed last time, was for the number 2 change to go all the way up to the Stevens Orange Street boundary. And then similarly, you'd have to compensate Paxson by going down to South Avenue and maybe grabbing those students that are in that golf course area, which is probably a better route for those kids to get there. So,
anything else from this table?
There was this section on the north part of the river, on the bike map. It was, I think, sent to Chief Charlo. But all these people, instead of going up here and then going downriver and then going up the hill, just going straight into Russell, seems like less driving, less time, just more accessible than coming back up the hill, this side of the river. That was another thing that we discussed.
Okay, well, thank you. And if you could, Nick, if you could mark on the map, we'll take that map and use that with your suggested changes and consider that too as we're doing this. Okay, so we're running a little bit behind. Thank you for waiting, members of the public. So, you can see this is an intense process for, a 2-hour meeting. These people, you might think, well, it's only 2 hours, but they've been at this for a while. This is their 3rd meeting, and they've committed to more. It's a lot of work, and there's homework. There's what? Oh, there's homework in between. So anybody have a comment they want to come up and share?
Yes, sure. I'm Eva Dunn-Frobig. I wanted to comment on the section in the Paxson district that's by the river, that in option number 1, I think it's the only option where there would be a change to Franklin district. And I just wanted to comment on the walkability, the bikeability, the safety piece of that. I think the only safe option from that neighborhood is to Paxson, to take the bike path and then essentially go south to Paxson. Hearing the recommendation from Ben Weiss to cross Broadway, I think that's a huge barrier for students. And then the comment about the motels that are in that neighborhood and the fact that they might go away at some point, but it might not be for 5 years. That's a long time. I also don't feel like crossing Russell is as an option to move kids in that neighborhood to Franklin. The other point I wanted to make about that neighborhood is I don't know a lot about like which neighborhoods in Paxson District are the most low income, but I know that there's a lot of low income housing in that neighborhood, and I feel like it would not be equitable to cut that neighborhood out of Paxson, whereas, you know, you're leaving the university neighborhood in there and the more high income housing in that district. So, and then I have a couple questions too. Well, no, I want to make one more point about that school district. It looked like from the data that you showed in the beginning of the meeting that that district is going to, the student population is going to increase in the next 5 years, but then it's also going to decline by, I think, about as much in the next 10 years. So I think that should be of consideration. And then there was a mention about students going to Paxson from out of district, and I just was curious how that happens and why that happens. I didn't realize that that was happening. And then maybe this is going to be addressed at a future date, but I'm curious how this affects middle schools and high schools. Like, for instance, if that neighborhood of Paxson moves to Franklin, does that mean that older kids are going to be going to C.S. Porter or a different high school and at some point, or are they grandfathered in? Okay.
Yeah, thank you. So, yeah, we take the questions, but we don't try to respond. But other comments, questions? Well, okay then. Thank you very much for your participation. Thank you to the advisory committee. Yeah, Mandy.
Yeah, I want to say one thing really quickly. So something that I kept hearing at the open house was that people were concerned about property values changing in the neighborhoods. And so I spent the last week going around to the different brokerages in town and talking to brokers and just kind of asking them questions. And I know that one of them had said at the open house that, you know, historically they used to use school boundaries, but now it's more, we do more geography when we're looking at comping homes. But so I talked to people from Lambros, Berkshire, Windmere, Remax, and Inc. Realty, and I'm on 3 committees for the MOR board. So I've talked to a lot of people about this because I know that's a big concern. And so, yes, there's definitely people who call realtors and are looking for specific school districts, or elementary schools rather. And, you know, where are they getting the information? I don't know, you know, sometimes the website, like different websites of rating schools, and who knows where that information is coming from necessarily. But so, yeah, they're looking at school districts, but, you know, just like they're looking at specific things they want for a house, a garage, a master bedroom, being able to walk to certain areas. So, you know, all of those, I think, are factors when people are looking for homes. And what I thought was really interesting is, I would say about 90% of the brokerages that I talked to didn't feel like changing a school district would affect a home value, but then another brokerage in town unanimously felt that it would, because it would change demand, is how they felt. And I really liked what one of them told me. They said, while changing of school boundaries will most certainly affect property values, in my opinion, that is not criteria that should determine
whether or not the boundaries are changed to make the most effective use of our facilities in our community. So, I just wanted to add that.
Hey, Mandy, it wasn't enough to just participate all the time and do all the homework. You had to like take on extra credit work. Thank you. So thanks again. I realize that this meeting and the last one too has been hard for you guys, I think, in many respects, but primarily because there just isn't enough time to have all the discussion you need. And so I think just to think about where we're headed next. So, we have this open house in a week, right? And that, we will take the comments that we've heard tonight from you guys and add in a few more options. They might be on one map or another. I think when we present these, when we ask people at the open houses, we'll ask them, what do you like? Not only which option do you like best, but what are the things about any option that you think is good or bad? And get feedback that way. And then when you come back to make your final recommendation on a final option, you'll have more information, particularly about the change areas. And of course, the other question for the public will be, is something missing that could be done that we haven't addressed? I can tell you when we worked on this, we looked at every single public comment that was geographically specific, and there's something in here that addresses that. Yes?
Are you gonna put that interactive map back up for comments?
So I believe we are hoping to do that. The issue is that we need to figure out how to do that in a way that displays these three map options, or some way just displays the areas, because, the 11 or 12 or whatever it may, because you only get one map. We can't put up three maps at one time. So we have to figure out how to do that, but that's the thought, yes. Okay, anything else? Thank you again for your hard work. By the way, the whole Board of Trustees, I attended their meeting, and they expressed their gratitude to you guys.